All right, I think we're at 6:30. Staff, are y'all ready? All right, I'd like to call this meeting to order. Can we have a roll call, please?
Sure. Good evening, everyone. Chairman Dibble,
Here?
Vice Chairman Schrader,
Here.
Commissioner Zarguni,
Here.
Commissioner Miller,
Here.
Commissioner York,
Here.
Commissioner Gonzalez is absent, Commissioner Mandel,
Here.
and Commissioner Salazar Garza. Here. Quorum established.
Would you like to read the opening statement? Okay, beautiful. I guess we don't have any approval of absences. Can I get approval of the minutes from the last meeting scheduled on February 23rd?
I make a motion that we approve the minutes.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, we'll move on to
Chair,
the...
did you
Yep.
address item number 2, public comment?
Oh, excuse me, yes. Is there anyone here from the public that would like to make a general public comment? There will be an opportunity as we go through the individual items if you want public comment on any specific item, but is there anyone who wants to make a general public comment? All right, there being none, we'll close that public comment period. And now we'll move on to Roman numeral 5, the consent public hearing.
Good evening, Commissioners. Mark Orozco, Senior City Planner with Development Services. I'm going to be reading into record consent items A and B, starting with the plats. First plat is Crestmont Unit 12. It's a final plat of 33.12 acres. Second plat is Cimarron Acres, Block 1, Lot 3, final 10.12 acres. Number 4, Flower Bluff Estates. Number 2, Block 8, Lot 12R, final plat of .189 acres. Number 5, Island Business Center, Unit 2, Block 1, Lot 1, final of 21.118 acres. Number 6, Blucher Subdivision, Tract 4, final plat of .439 acres. Item number 7, Caspian Subdivision, this is a prelim plat of 99.517 acres. Number 8, Cottages by the Bay, Unit 3, final plat of 11.06 acres. Number 9, Country Club Estates, Unit 20, Block 2, Lot 7F and 7G. This is a replat of 1.42 acres. Number 10, Waldron Addition, Block 2, Lot 1, final plat of 1.43 acres. Number 11, Bridges Mill Village, Unit 2. It's a final plat of 10.94 acres. Number 12, Clarkwood Annex, Block 1, Lot 17, final 6.13 acres. And actually, this one has a variance associated with it, sidewalk waiver. Going on to item 14, Cenizo Acres, Block 1, Lot 1, final 1.1 acres. This one as well has a sidewalk waiver. All plats are meeting the UDC standards and the Texas Local Government Code. TRC and staff recommends approval. And if there's any questions, or actually, let me go ahead and read consent item B. It's zoning. Rezoning the property at 6626 Williams Drive. Case number 0322-01. The owners are South Texas Rainbow LP, and it's a rezoning from the CN1 to the CN1 with a special permit. And staff recommends approval on the rezoning.
Does anyone have questions for staff on items in Roman numeral 5, A and B? Just to confirm, before we ask for a vote, Commissioner York, is he abstaining from items 12 and 13? Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
I have a question on number 16. The applicant wanting to change the zoning from CN1 to CN1 special permit, correct?
That's,
Yes,
actually, the special permit will be recommendation.
yes, CN1 SP.
So, just want to know, is there a time limit with this special permit, or? I read the presentation, I wasn't sure exactly what.
Right, let me look at that.
Lena Buenteo, Development Services. Good evening, Commissioners. Yes, there's a time limit of 24 months.
And mainly they're wanting to use the property to just park vehicles?
Correct.
If you'd like a presentation on that, Commissioner, we can
Yes,
pull
I'd
that.
like to
We
pull that
can pull
presentation.
that from the consent item.
Thank you, if you don't mind. pull that.
Okay. Item 16 is being pulled from the consent agenda.
And I do have a question on number 7 for the staff.
Okay.
And this is the subdivision that we had to annex it, and the developer or the former owner had to put the lift station on. Is there any update on status of that lift station that
Well-
was
well,
supposed to be built?
The lift station is in progress, and I believe they're probably at about 60% on the
60%?
project. Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, want to see if we can get a motion to approve. Is there any public comment? All right, there being none, we'll close the public comment. I'd like to see if I can get a motion for letter A, items 2 through 11, and items 14 through 14 and 15.
I'll make a motion, we approve items 2 through 11, 14, and 15 as presented.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Either one of us, we said it simultaneously.
Okay, now can I get a motion on items 12 and 13?
Make a motion, we approve items 12 and 13 as presented.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, I guess moving on to item number 16.
Good evening, Commissioners. Elena Buenteo, Development Services. Item number 16 is zoning case 0322-01, South Texas Rainbow LP. It's a rezoning of the property from, at 6626 Williams Drive from CN1 to a CN1 with an SP. The proposed use is for commercial use. It's for the storage of vehicles. Public notification was sent out, 0 opposed, 0 in favor. Staff's recommendation, the subject property's future land use is for commercial, and it's been vacant since 1954. The proposed rezoning is compatible with the neighboring properties that are zoned commercial. And the subject property is part of a large commercial node. The applicant's requesting the special permit for the storage of overflow vehicles from the Mike Shaw Kia. There will be a small building on site to serve as an office. The site will not be open to the public. Additionally, they will provide a preparatory cleaning prior to being moved to the main dealership. These are the conditions of the special permit. Uses stay the same as in the base zoning, except for the vehicle storage and auto detailing. The applicant will be required to screen. There are specific hours of operation. Vehicle delivery will not be allowed from 9 p.m. to 7 a.m. There's specific lighting, noise, and landscaping requirements, and the time limit is 24 months. Staff stands by for questions.
I've got one quick question.
Yes,
On
sir.
the loading and unloading of those vehicles, is that going to be allowed to happen on Williams Drive like the car dealerships on SPID do when they come off of the transport truck? Or is that a condition of the special permit?
It is not a condition, but we do have the applicant on hand.
No, that would not be permitted,
Oh, okay,
that they cannot load and unload in the public right-of-way.
okay. Commissioner Zarguni?
Thank you. I have a few questions. So currently, this property is on CN1, and under the CN1, they won't be able to park vehicles because that falls into not,
Into a light industrial type
Correct.
use, yes.
so they have to change the zoning for CG1 or CG2.
Yes.
My question is, why is the special permit given to them for 2 years? I'm trying to exactly understand the main reason.
Oh, it's not a time limit on the permit. It's for them to begin to use it. So the use needs to begin within 24 months. If that doesn't begin within 24 months, then the special permit becomes void. There's not a time limit on it unless the use, yeah.
Yeah,
Does
that's
that,
correct.
does
So they
that
would-
time limit also apply when it ceases? You know, if they sell the property and stop using it for that special permit purpose, do they have 24 months or?
No, it's only the time which they would come in and get a permit. So they have 24 months to come in and get their construction permit. They're building an office on the site. There's going to have to be site development. So that provides them the time in order to do that.
Can you go back to that slide, please, where the zoning's showing? Okay. So is it my understanding that instead of requesting a change of a zoning to CG1 kind of a thing, they're asking for C1 special permit purposely to just park their vehicles?
Yeah, their request is for CN1SP, and that was a result of conversation with staff, but that is their request. So they're not requesting a higher zoning district or a more intense zoning district. They're only requesting the addition of the SP to accommodate the storage of vehicles. The CN1 will be more in line with the adjacent properties that are also CN1, and also there are residential uses across the street. So it would be more in line with those neighborhood uses. And then also there's going to be a 6-foot screening around the property and even screening from public view. And that is typically required of all of our outdoor storage
And that was
uses.
that is my kind of question or concern.
Yes, sir.
So staff recommend approval, but
Yes, sir.
because CN1 and right across of it is residential. Okay. All right, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Are there any other questions for staff? Thank you. Is the applicant or representative here? Yes.
Chairman, Commissioners, my name is Cliff Atnip. I reside at 358 University Drive here in Corpus Christi. I'm a commercial broker here. I represent Kia on this, and I also represent the seller on the rezoning of this. We looked, Mike Shaw does phenomenally well on that dealership. And after we get through all this pandemic and making more chips, they anticipate getting back up to the levels that for selling over on SPID. So they dispatched me out to find a location where they could store used cars, and that's what this is. They'll do some make-readies, because some of the used cars will come here. We'll offload off of Williams. That was part of the negotiations we had with staff. It'll be screened. They'll do make-readies and then drive them over to the dealership and sell them. It's one of the easiest and closest places for us to get back and forth. So we sat with staff, we discussed what we needed. Originally, I was going to go for a higher zoning. They said that would probably not fly, and so that's why we went with a special permit. And we agreed to all the terms that were here.
So,
Can
Anybody have questions?
I have a question, I'm sorry. So their whole purpose mainly is for have additional storage places for storing vehicles?
That's it. It's the only reason.
And there was no other properties that you felt that could fit?
Sure, I looked
Because
all over.
My concern, I mean, because it's surrounding some residential neighborhoods right across of it. And parking vehicles falls into that CG1 zoning. And I know you guys requesting for a special permit with screening and everything. I'm not sure exactly as maybe why some other properties were not incompatible, but you answered it for mainly locations and parking vehicles. Okay, thank you.
Right. And if you drive on down there on any given day, you're going to go through past the theater, which is right next door, and you'll see a whole bunch of cars parked in their parking lot on a regular basis.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions
Any other
I can
questions?
answer?
All right, there
Okay,
being
thank you
none,
very much.
thank you.
Appreciate it.
At this time, I'd like to open up the public comment period for item number 16. There being none, I will close the public comment for item number 16 and look for a motion.
I'll make a motion that we approve item 16 as presented by staff.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. Motion passes. Moving on to item number 17, we have a briefing from the Parks and Recreation Community Enrichment Fund, progress on the audit.
I have your presentation. Thank you. If I can see my.
Kimberly Houston with the City Auditor's Office. This presentation will provide an overview of the audit objectives, the scope of work, the criteria by which we use to measure the community enrichment fund expenditures in conducting our audit work. Those are largely the UDC and park practices. The progress of assigning newly assigned collected community enrichment fund to its unique accounting identifier, best known as org numbers, and the process of identifying community enrichment funds available for use on park projects. I will take you through audit's examination process using 3 park projects as examples by comparing them against criteria from the UDC along with parks internal processes on a sample basis. This presentation will conclude by sharing 3 preliminary recommendations. Our recommendations typically include components to address the cause of an audit finding or the condition for which we discover the findings. This presentation does not include in many recommendations related to the cause because they are related to UDC language and the complexity surrounding its application. We do this because audit has taken into consideration the meetings that audit has participated with city management on community enrichment funds and upcoming changes to the UDC. As the audit is still in progress, any information in this presentation could be changed once the final report is issued. The objective of this audit was to determine if sufficient controls are in place over Fund 4720, the Community Enrichment Fund expenditures, to ensure they align with the UDC Section 8.3 Public Open Space. The audit scope is October 1st, 2016 through September 30th, 2021. This slide is a representative of the restricted use community enrichment fund expenditures only. Our audit scope includes an examination of the expenses shown in the second to last column. Please note that fiscal year 21 are unaudited numbers and are presented for informational purposes. Slide 4 shows the purpose behind this section of the UDC, which is that public parks are to be located within convenient distances from a majority of the residences to be served, and the primary cost of public parks should be borne by the ultimate residential property owners who, by reason of proximity of their property to such parks, shall be the primary beneficiary of such facilities. We look to see if funds were spent within 7 years of receipt. This is not related to the allowable refundable period allowed for property owners. We also evaluate whether funds were spent on park acquisition or improvement. That means we make sure that there was no mowing or other maintenance costs that were spent. And we also evaluate whether funding locations were no more than 5 miles from the subdivision, and consideration was made on the proximity of major barriers. We found in January 2013, the radius for which funding could be spent was increased from 1.5 miles to 5 miles after the completion of a park development plan. Parks records show that the process to applying this change was to apply existing funds collected prior to the January 2013 date, as it was originally collected at the 1.5 mileage radius, although the new ordinance was silent on this, because the new ordinance was silent on this. When deciding how to spend community enrichment funds, We Learn Parks took a holistic approach and looked at the needs of the park system as a whole in respect of mileage and their use to manage the funds by distances, how this process was applied. Consideration of proximity of major barriers was not found to be considered. This slide shows how money is added or consolidated into account org numbers. This software is where staff would enter Platt coordinates into a database linked to Google Maps, and the system will pull up the nearest org number to the coordinates entered, which you'll see that we have the longitude and latitude on the left side, and the right side would be an example of how you would see an available org number where the funds could be added. This side of the software shows how money is found to identify to be spent. The coordinates are entered as presented in the plat. And on the right side, it populates potential org numbers in the vicinity of that plat. At this point, funds are identified for spending. Please note that the amounts shown on this particular slide are outside the city's financial system, and so don't accept those as official amounts. It's just for example purposes. All right, so the first example I'm going to walk you through is the Cole Park Pier project. This is the ordinance that City Council approved, and we're going to start with walking through one of these examples for one of these org numbers. All right, so the first funding source we're going to look at is the Ben Garza org, which is $37,500. You can see that is within a 5-mile radius of the Cole Park Pier. This next one, just like the other one, shows that the Cano Place Unit 2 at $25,300 is in the 5-mile radius. And we also provide an alternative consideration beyond just the direct mileage by showing like if the drivability from the org to the site, and it also visually shows accessibility factors. And I'm going to go back a couple of slides. Again, you can stay where you are so you can see how Cano Place, if you look right here On this slide, it's with the fifth one down. So if you put the coordinates in for Cole Park, you can see that Candle Place populates is within the 5-mile radius. All right, this is a similar case as the prior ones, but you can also see that although accessibility factor could have been considered here, the balance of this org was very low, but the UDC is silent on how funds should be allocated at such low levels. So, but this was within the 5-mile radius, and it was expenditure spent on Cole Park. Here's our second example. New equipment was purchased for Brockhampton Park. The Community Enrichment Fund committed $59,000 to it, and you can see that the mileage is within 5 miles, but you can also see the visible accessibility factors that need to be considered for this project. All right, this last example also shows a Paul Jones Sports Facility, minor improvements where $20,000 in community enrichment funds were committed, and although it's within the 5-mile radius, you can visibly see the accessibility factors that needed to be considered. All right, so this last slide are our preliminary recommendations. Our preliminary recommendation is that until ordinance changes are made to incorporate consideration of proximity of major barriers to accessibility of parks and park improvements in accordance with the UDC Section 8.36. We recommend standardized records through procedures to identify the source of community enrichment fund to enable better accounting and application of funds. And we also recommend to incorporate language into the upcoming UDC changes, how existing community enrichment funds will be spent after new changes are permitted. This last one was added because in past practice was that to delineate the old practices to the new practices and look at those buckets separately. So that's why this recommendation is to include that language in the new UDC. Are there any questions?
Commissioner Miller?
I got two questions. First question is can you go back to the slide that has the table?
For Cole Park?
Yes. So I'm a little confused. Is this a tabulation of all of community enrichment funds and park development fees that were used and applied to the Cole Park Pier renovation?
Yes, was approved by City Council.
But go to, I guess, pick one, go to Ben Garza. Or actually, go back one, sorry, go back to that slide. Go to the Brooklyn subdivision, the $11.20. Okay. I guess I'm not following something with regards to the examples that you were giving about the Paul Jones park improvements.
Okay, so the criteria we use to measure whether expenditures were spent in accordance with the UDC were not just mileage. We also looked for consideration of the accessibilities of barriers, which would be freeways, navigable streams, and bodies of water.
Okay, so in this case, you're crossing a major SPID,
Right.
as well as, is that what is that? Neosho Creek or? Sorry, I'm having to look at something
Sorry,
real
so
fuzzy.
That's just a master drainage channel.
The master drainage channel? Okay. My second question is, whenever it went from 1.5 mile radius to a 5 mile radius, whenever that text amendment was made, how did they handle the funds? Because right now, we're being asked to basically adopt the new plan with the area development areas. But, you know, my comments at last meeting was, I can understand this so long as it becomes, you know, there's a dividing line where we're starting this now and all the funds collected at this point get dispersed in this manner, but everything that was collected under a certain set of circumstances in the past needs to be properly allocated, you know, as per the UDC at the time it was collected. How was the funds handled whenever it changed from a 1.5 mile radius to a 5 mile radius? Does anybody know?
That statement that you just said was the practice that was followed. We found that was followed.
So everything that was collected based on a 1.5 mile radius was dispersed in those manners, or as close as possible in those manners, and then everything that was collected from that point on, when it went to a 5 mile radius, was dispersed as close as possible.
Right, so the past Parks Management made that decision.
Okay. All right. Those are my questions. Thanks.
Okay.
Commissioner Schroeder?
Back to your Cole Park slide. Yeah. So I guess first let me clarify. This was part of your audit project. You went back to what was approved for this. So you don't know what rationale was used to select these particular line items to go into the Cole Park, or what? That's not your purview. You found what was attributed to Cole Park, and then tested whether or not they met the criteria. Is that?
So part of our evaluation process includes interview with park staff, and so we sat with them and they walk us through the process of how they identify funds available for new projects. And that includes, you know, they will plat the particular project that they plan on starting, and the software that they use pulls up the plats that in that vicinity. So for instance, if I go back to this slide right here, this particular longitude is for Cole Park. And you can see on the right where it kind of populates different orgs in that area and the distance it is from that plat.
Okay, so it's essentially when you're going through, so if you're a park staff person and you were charged with creating a budget or a fund to fill a budget for a project, you would go through this sort of screen process, find out what's available within the criteria, and then you select items until you have enough to fill your budget. Is that?
That's the process that was the walkthrough with us, with the park staff, yes.
Okay. So, as an example, this $11.20 from an area that's across the Harbor Bridge in North Beach, it just fit the basic criteria, and it was dropped in there so that it could be used to contribute to the budget. It wasn't there wasn't any kind of criteria set that would said, hey, it doesn't make sense to attribute this all the way on the other side of. Granted, it's a very little amount of money. It's going through the sieve, essentially.
It fit within the 5 mile radius, and so that's how it populated on this this database. So it was identified as fundings available.
Okay, and so your test criteria where you're showing these slides where ones that they've got a significant barrier to cross is where what you're using to sort of question, does it make sense to attribute those funds because of these significant barriers? Is that what you're raising as potential considerations for using to evaluate the process?
Yes.
Okay. And so from your audit, will things like this, I mean, I don't really know how you would go about entering, or is there a mechanism in that input data form to recognize significant barriers?
We were actually looking at each one ourselves.
Okay.
We
So
were putting in the
is-
coordinates and looking them up on a map.
Okay, so that's not only part of your audit process, but that is also part of the assembling the budget process for future projects.
That's part of the parks project process in accordance with the UDC, that
Okay.
it should be considering accessibility factors.
Okay, and that is, and that component is not automated. That is essentially a human judgment function, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner York?
Thank you. So before I ask my question, that the slide with the Cole Park funds, when you showed all the different slides, it had the radius, were all those funds deemed to be in compliance with the UDC guidelines?
What we found is that is within the 5-mile radius. We didn't find in the records to show that consideration was made for accessibility.
So the ones,
Not in the records.
so it was not considered?
We didn't find in the records to show that.
Okay. Well, that kind of leads to my point, and I really appreciate the presentation. It's good to know how this was broken down, but that was my first concern, was it looked like it was saying, well, we looked at this, but yeah, they crossed the boundary, but we still think it's appropriate. And I get that there's going to be somebody has to make that call. There's a human judgment there.
And there could have been conversations had. It's just we're looking for documentation.
Sure. My point, I guess, is not so much to do with the audit, but just this brings up the same point I keep making, is I think the most important thing to me is the intent behind the ordinance. And even with the way it's being rewritten, I think the intent is getting lost there, because the intent is to spend this money at the park most likely to be used by the people who are paying the funds. And can you go to the slide that was, it was over by like the Oso, or was it Lozano Golf Course? Yeah, this one here. So one, there's barriers here. So you could argue accessibility, but I get that's a judgment call. But I feel like it's really obvious if you think about the intent. Where is the park most likely to be used by money spent from this neighborhood? And there's major city parks. I assume they're city, maybe I'm wrong and they're private, but there's all kind of sports facilities over here by this golf course. My niece has soccer practice out there, and it's a pretty big park facility. And I want to make the point again that I think it's really important if we pass this ordinance change, that emphasis is put on the intent, which is to spend the money at the park most likely to be used. Same thing with the North Beach example. I get that's pretty close to get to Cole Park, but pretty big park facilities in North Beach, they got a lot of beach to maintain. I mean, I know it was $11, but it's just the principle. That could have been spent in North Beach. I know they could use a lot of money. So I just want to make that point again. I think it's important because when we go to these area development zones, they can just basically spend the money anywhere. And I just, I really want that language to keep that in there and emphasize that, so that at least it's there and it's hopefully guiding people as they're making that human judgment call. But thank you.
Commissioner Salazar Garza?
Yes, just like what Commissioner York was saying, something to that, like all these parks that, like the example, I'm going to use the Ben Garza Park. So this amount of money that was taken, that was the money that was used for the area for the Ben Garza Park. And they applied it to the Cole Park, all of these, correct?
Correct. So you also have to consider that there was a point where when new money was received by through Community Enrichment Fund, and where a new org number was created, where there were so many funds that it was difficult to manage. And so management at the time decided to evaluate all these various org numbers and try to consolidate them in the same fashion they did before. So whatever funding in nearby orgs, they would consolidate it, for instance, into Ben Garza, because that was the closest org near it.
Okay, so with that being said, we're changing it now to the 5-mile range to, we're applying that to this new ordinance that we're going to try to pass here or something. And prior to that, it was the 1.5. So when all these funds were given or were taken from the residents and are supposed to be applying to their area park, which I think this is what is being, presented here. What's gonna happen to Ben Garza Park then? I mean, is there any funding there? Is that park just gonna have to stay there without any of the funding being worked on for that park and for the other parks as well? Because if you're pulling out money from one park to make another park really nice, and what happens to that park?
While this probably would be a question best answered by park staff, this is just one of many funding sources for parks.
No, I understand, and I know that the development fees also had, over $1 million applied to it.
And I'll gladly answer that question, ma'am. I think that with the audit, which I think the audit office has done a good job on it, I think that a lot of comments that are being made on the major policy decisions are being based off of, well, one example, Cole Park Pier. There's numerous examples over 14 years of community enrichment funds that have been placed into the fund and expenditures that have been made to affect parks across the city. But all these comments and everything have been made based off of one example, which was a very large project in the city. I can assure you that there have been times where there has been a budget org made for Ben Garza Park. Monies have been put into that budget org, and examples have been made where improvements have been made in the Ben Garza area, but that's not being reflected in this audit presentation.
Yes, sir, and I'm not questioning the work that you guys did. I mean, I'm commending it because I know a little bit about auditing, and it is tedious work that nobody likes to do.
Yes, sir.
It is stressful, and I'm sure you guys do not get a good night's sleep sometimes. But the fact of the matter is, we're pulling out monies that you're saying that within the 5-mile range, when these monies were collected for this park, that wasn't the ordinance then, right?
Well, yes, it depends on the date that it was put in.
So with that being said, then, I don't know, I guess I'm just thinking about these other parks that being, that are not getting the funds that they paid for.
Yeah, I don't think that that's the case. It sounds like a narrative of parks being left behind, but I don't think that that's the case. I think that the audit, again, is showing but one example where monies were pulled from another account to go towards the Cole Park Pier. But there's countless examples in those budget org line items where monies that were dedicated to, like Ben Garza,
So then
were
these
spent
parks
in
are
Ben
gonna be
Garza.
addressed as far as trying to fix them up?
Yeah,
and
yes, ma'am.
invest?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Which was the intent of the UDC. So, yeah, that's,
Okay.
yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, I had one more question, and I just forgot earlier. Can you go to the last slide where you had the recommendations, or maybe one last, but where you, I just want to make sure I understood this. So this last one, incorporate language into the upcoming UDC, how existing CEF money will be spent. So are you saying that your recommendation is that the existing money be spent per the new guidelines, or that it be spent per the old guidelines?
No, this recommendation is saying that management should incorporate into the new UDC changes how the money that's in the current pool should be spent.
You're just saying that they should
They need to include that language.
make a decision. You're not making a recommendation on which way they go, I guess.
No.
Okay, just want to be clear. Thank you.
Commissioner Miller?
If you could go back one more time to the table. You've got some different shading. You've got some blue and gray and white, and what is that shading indicating? Because I don't see a
Oh, sure.
key.
The gray shading is for unrestricted funds.
Okay.
And the ones that are with the ones behind at the very end, that means that the funds have been depleted to zero.
Well, but you also got blue. Like Ben Garza's blue, Conno Place is blue, Gabriel Terrace is blue, Brooklyn Subdivision is blue. What does that blue indicate?
I'm sorry, the ones that don't have the one by is the one that we have in our example on the slide. My apologies. Like Cano Place.
Oh, okay, so that's just being backed up.
Yeah.
So so obviously the development fees can be spent anywhere. So that's unrestricted, right? Mm-hmm. This unrestricted 15,752, where did that come from?
Some of that's from park sales.
Okay. And then of the remaining, so obviously the Cole Park Org 21-336 is, you take that out of the equation. So we're looking at 37.5, 16.25, 25.312, 997. You know, call it what, $60,000 or so of questionable, whether or not, you know, obviously there's a three-part test. There's 5 mile radius, there's natural barriers, and there's most likely to park most likely to that for those residents to frequent, right? It's a three-way test.
It's more than that. We also looked at, you know, was the expenditure allowable, for instance, park or acquisition or development. We looked at whether or not it's within that radius and was accessibility factors considered.
Okay. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 org numbers that were improperly used, correct?
I wouldn't say improperly used, because the UDC says no greater than 5 miles, and that's the upper limit for for eligibility.
So it only has to meet the 5 mile radius? It doesn't have to?
No. So the upper limit, it has to be spent within 5 miles, but it says that accessibility factors should be considered too.
Okay. I'm still confused. So does it only have to meet one criteria, or does it have to meet all of the criteria?
There's multiple criteria.
Right.
And we look in the documentation for, one, is it within the 5 mileage? And we look in the documentation to see if accessibility factors were considered in the management decision.
But you said earlier that are you, you're asking if the accessibility, are all of these org numbers in compliance with accessibility?
Well, so maybe this would be a better way of answering. So when the final report comes out and we start quantifying things, we're going to say, you know, our test sample was roughly, let's say, thrown out there, 30 org numbers, 30 expenditures. We examine whether or not were they within the 5 mile radius or the 1.5 miles, whichever case it may be, you know, and here's the number that were. You know, and of those, these were the ones that we identified that needed consideration for accessibility. And did we see any records that showed that it was considered?
And the answer to that question was
no. And we
no.
will present that. So for these that you see, like, you know, we didn't see any records that showed that accessibility was considered.
A question on that. Did you guys find out, like we were talking earlier, somebody has to make that human judgment whether or not the accessibility is there or if the barrier should be used and keep the funds on this side of the barrier. Did you find out who has that authority? I mean, is it the director of Parks and Rec? Is it just the staffer that's doing it, or council? Who makes that decision?
I'm going to let manager make that.
And that's a good point. I think that last time that we came before the commission, we explained that there's so much ambiguity and so much language in this UDC that's up for interpretation, like accessibilities and barriers. Well, what are barriers and what are accessibilities? What are parks that are most likely to be used by a resident? If there's 5 parks within the 5 mile area, Dante may use one park, I'm most likely use another park. So our recommendations that we're trying to bring before the commission is trying to make something more quantifiable, something that's not left up to interpretation. So both the council, the commission, and the development community is all operating on the same page. And currently, we simply don't have that. In addition, I think that there should also be stated that everybody, we're wrapped around the axle regarding the Cole Park Pier and accessibility, but one thing that's not captured in the audit presentation is it states that a park that's most likely to be used by the residents also talks about the barriers and accessibility, but also has language in there states that, or the funds can be utilized for a regional park, which Cole Park is. So questions about impropriety and unqualified expenditures, I don't understand, because the Cole Park is covered, at least is double insulated in the code as a legitimate expense, with it being a regional park and it being within 5 miles of those contributing budget line items.
Okay. I agree with what you're saying about Cole Park, except for the expenditures on the south side that could have gone to Bill Witt, but different subject. And what you're bringing up, the changes, so it sounds like there's nothing in the UDC or there's no current policy for who made that judgment call now, but the new language, I know that it's quantifiable now and it's a little easier, but there's always going to be some human that has to interpret it. Is it laid out in the new language? And I know we've read it and I apologize, but who has that authority now, or
The Parks and Recreation Director.
Okay.
Later on in the proposed ordinance, you read that the Parks and Recreation Director maintains the ultimate authority over decisions that's handled regarding fees, regarding if parks are going to be accepted, and the use of the community enrichment fund. So that's one part. That's the use of the fund. I'm sorry, the receipt of the funds. But also, if you all recall, who has the ultimate authority over the expenditure of the fund is the general public. That's why we're bringing before council or bringing before recommendations that, hey, we'll have an annual budget each year on which there's going to be input from the general public, there's going to be input from council, and it'll be adopted by council. And that's the ultimate authority on how the funds will be expended going into the future.
Understood. I agree with that, but I doubt that council and the public are going to see all of those kind of slides and be able to, when it gets that far, it's already been analyzed. So they got a lot to do, but I appreciate their response.
Yeah, where the rubber meets the road is the Parks and Recreation Director with oversight with city management and city council.
Commissioner Schrader?
I was concerned about the last meeting that this would start getting into this territory, so I'm going to attempt to make sort of this big picture, invite us as a body to consider the big picture thing here, because one of the major things we have to do, or we're asked to do at this body, is provide leadership in respect to things like this that are at a large scale consideration for the city. Having this audit presentation and continuing our later item on the agenda for the modification of how this process is implemented and trying to simplify that process is difficult, putting these at the same time. I believe the audit department's done a wonderful job in trying to provide examples and demonstrate how this was done. I do think if we want to go down the rabbit hole and pick apart over half of these, it's saying, oh, I don't agree with how that one's suspended because how that one's spent on this project because this is a barrier. That we can disagree about that all day long. And if you want to go look at a city that can't get past themselves on this, go to Austin. It'll take them 10 years to approve a park because everybody is wound around the axle about this item or that item, and this is these tiny special interests. And we could debate this all day. The real place that this needs to be considered for the best value of the city and for the residents is turn this part on its head and look at it from a master planning standpoint. Where do we put parks? Why do we put them there? How do people access it? And do we have enough or too many so that the funds can be spent well? That's the way you give people really good value for their parks. But taking expenditures and picking them apart at the finest level, we'll never get there. We won't spend any money because everybody will want their money back because it didn't go to the one place they wanted it. So the best thing we can do in this body is figure out how we can provide leadership from the standpoint of big picture and give and authorize staff the tools and the processes to do that in a way that can build trust in the community. And I'm worried that continuing to pick this process apart is going to invite the public to not trust the process and not trust that they're getting value in their area and see it being so. And so I really appreciate your presentation, the process you've gone through, and the examples you've made on this. And I think it's a very good job, and it shows the pitfalls, and it shows that it depends on human judgment in many of these things. And so there are some pieces here. It's clear that there are pieces here that are kind of automated, and then it's clear that there has to be human judgment in how they're assembled. And you do get some random ones that come into play. $11.20 from an area on North Beach going to Cole Park, or, you know, and somebody has to make a judgment call on them. And so we've got to trust the staff at some point to do things like that. And I just hope we're able to see that for what it is, that it's part of the process, and then challenge and invite staff to put together a process that's transparent and simple enough that they can do their work. And I believe that they've got a very good beginning on that in the presentation that will be made tonight for the third time. Anyway, that's my piece on that. I hope we're able to find a path forward on it.
Any other questions for staff on item number 17? All right, thank you for your presentation. Moving on to Roman numeral 7, item C, number 18, the Unified Development Code text amendments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Can I ask a question before y'all dive into that?
Sure.
But just in the interest of time, since we've done this 3 times, for your benefit too, because I'm sure you don't like repeating yourself, maybe just hit the highlights, or if there's anything new that you guys have, that has changed maybe. But I mean to just speak for myself, but I assume we're all pretty well versed on this by now.
That's fine by me. However y'all want to handle it.
If that's possible.
Sure. We're waiting for the presentation from IT. Oh. Oh, okay.
Yeah, let me,
Okay.
yeah, we uploaded it for you, my apologies.
Thank you, ma'am.
There you go, sir.
Thank you. So, and thank you, sir. Yeah, I really do appreciate it. We definitely can give you all a summarized version. So before we do, let me begin with my thoughts on the audit. I think that the audit really has exemplified what the conversations and the recommendations that we presented to you all over the last 3 times that we have engaged with the Planning Commission. As you can see, just in the short briefing that the Auditor's Office provided you all, it's proven that the 5-mile radius doesn't work. It's led to the discussion of land use experts such as yourselves sitting at the dais to walk away with not a full understanding, okay, is it this, is it this? You know, it's really left everybody with more questions than answers. Now, if you think that land use experts have a hard time wrapping their head around this and trying to make different interpretations on accessibility and barriers, how can we expect for us to lay that burden on the general public? Number one. Then number two, I know that there's been questions about the area development zones. Well, under the current process, trying to accommodate a 5-mile radius, you have to utilize a latitude and longitude to figure out what expenditures, where the expenditures come from and where those expenditures are going to be made. The average Corpus Christi citizen doesn't have a compass, and I don't think that it's fair for us to put a burden on, or onus upon them to try to do calculations on latitude and longitude, figure out if an expenditure against that fund is legitimate or not. We're trying to simplify this process, say, hey, if a development is in this specific area development zone, the monies is going to stay within that area development zone. That's something that area development zone is a standard that's understood by the Planning Commission it's studied by the city council, it's understood by the development community, and most importantly, it's understood by the general public. And I think that that's what's owed to our citizens, and that's what city staff is trying to ask for you all's approval on. In addition, I think that the audit has shown that the current system with this 5-mile radius is outdated and it doesn't keep up with growth. As Kimberly has stated, as more growth and development came into that system and more budget org line items were created, it just kept ballooning and ballooning and ballooning and ballooning to a point where they stopped creating budget line items and they just started throwing new money into old legacy line items. Even as we're speaking, the last 3 times that we've spoken with the Planning Commission and the City Council, I've spoken with Dante, and there's been 13 new contributions to the Community Enrichment Fund that needs to be placed into a budget line item. We decided that we was going to freeze that, try to figure out, let's figure out what's going to take place with the ordinance amendments so we can not, once again, just throw more money into a financial black hole for accounting. So those are our recommendations. We are recommending to have the area development zones where we get everything down to an accounting of 11 pots of money instead of 138. We're asking that we have one flat fee that doesn't require algebra to calculate in order to figure out what a developer is going to owe when he wants to invest in our community. And we're making recommendations to include those controls in the Community Enrichment Fund as suggested by the Auditor's Office. And we simply will stand by for any questions that you all may have regarding the recommendations by the city staff. And we recommend that the Planning Commission approve the ordinance amendment as presented.
Commissioner York.
Just one quick question. When it goes to the area development zones, and again, I've said repeatedly, I'm always worried about the intent.
Yes, sir.
Is there language in there that's going to keep from someone being rigid and say there's a money spent on the far west end of area development zone, X, but there's a park right across the street. It just happens to be in a different zone. Is there language in there that allows a little bit of flexibility when it's, in certain circumstances like that?
Well, if we did that, then we'd basically be regressing right back into.
So no, it's very rigid.
Yes, it's rigid in the fact. Actually, it's flexible. It's flexible in saying, hey, this is the boundaries of where you can invest this money, that being the area development zone, and that really sets the limits, and that sets an expectation for the general community. Now, one thing that's not being said is there has to be a trust in the senior staff. There has to be a trust in the Parks and Recreation Director to have a thumb on the heartbeat of the needs in the community. And that's not being stated in the UDC, it's not being stated in any of the conversations that's being had amongst city staff and the commission and council, but that's what we hire the Parks and Recreation Director and his assistant directors to make those calls. They have a Parks and Recreation master plan. They are out there in the community on a daily basis. They're the ones that's cutting their grass. They're the ones that's maintaining equipment. It's highly expected that they know where that money needs to be invested and make sure that we're getting the most leverage for the money that we're being given stewardship over.
Sure. I understand you got to draw the line somewhere. I just wanted to ask because that thought popped into my head. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Commissioner Schrader.
I want to commend you all for continuing to work on this and really try to make this a transparent process and one that people can build trust in. The zone concept that's created, it's certainly not perfect, but it is far easier to understand and be transparent than what was illustrated by the auditor's examples, and that's why I think that presentation was important, because it's a way, it just shows how bogged down this process can get is really what it amounts to. I do think it's very critical that what is really promoted by the city, and I believe the planning department is doing a good job at this, and I believe they're getting better. I think the last 3 years have made it really difficult for them to get that transparency and public input. But the real place that this stuff becomes powerful are what you just mentioned, the parks master planning, the area development zone planning processes, getting public input, the members of this body that participate in it, the council members that participate in it, and put those ideas forward, get our consultants focused on those things. And that's why I have a tendency, I challenge a lot of the consultants because I want their best effort out of those processes, and not that this is what they've always done at this project in Dallas or this one in Houston, but this is corporate. You have to look at this for the location that it is. And I think we need to continue to challenge that so that we get, because that's where we're going to find the value in, did we get the best value for our dollars spent, and for residents, and whether people really take ownership in their neighborhood, in their community, and making those pieces work well. So I do think it's important that we have, that somebody can kind of explain when those situations come up, like Mr. York just illustrated, where you've got a park on a boundary between two zones, and somebody can explain how that park is not so much about where every dollar was spent and came from, but the fact that it is benefiting the residents around it, regardless of where the boundary is between those two zones.
Yes, sir.
And those are that's how people can see that stuff.
Yes, sir.
And so I think that keeping that in the forefront is really important.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Commissioner Miller?
And I echo Commissioner Schrader as far as the simplification of this process with the proposal. I'm 100% in favor of the proposal. The only thing that gives me some pause is, I mean, I view these fees as essentially a tax, right? So if I pay my tax in a given year to CCISD, and some of those dollars at one point were pulled and given to Flower Bluff ISD, and yeah, I could transfer my kid over to Flower Bluff ISD or whatever, but still, you know, if I was paying into something with a certain set of assumptions, and those assumptions changed without my knowledge or outside of my control, that's the only part that I have a problem with. And the other thing that I wanted to clear up was, under the proposal as presented, the fund balances there's some sort of percentage distribution amongst the different area zones. How was that come up? How was that arrived at, those percentages?
Yes, sir. So the Community Enrichment Fund, I'm tracking, but it's a fee. It's a fee. It's not a tax. The difference being that it's paid by the developers. Now, whether they decide that they're going to pass that cost along to the homeowners or not is, you know, a business decision. But it's them that's with the understanding up front that, hey, if you want to develop residential development in Corpus Christi, then there's a fee associated with that development so we can protect our green space. And with that expectation and understanding that they paid I was going to say the bulk, but they paid 100% of the funding that it is in the Community Enrichment Fund. They have not been absent in this discussion regarding the UDC and the budget and everything. We've met no less than 11 times to make sure that there was a shared understanding and there was buy-in from the development community, the individuals that paid the funding into the Community Enrichment Fund prior to us coming before, you know, the Planning Commission and the council. Well, I can't say prior, I'll say during, because there's much back and forth. And then second, regarding the second question you asked was?
The percentages, the divvying up of the remaining fund balances?
The staff is making a recommendation of equitable distribution of the funding across the city. So it's really based off of growth in the population of each district. So you'll see that we have, you know, a larger bulk is going to go to District 5 because according to the heat maps that we was showing you all before, you know, that's where the development is taking place. It's taking place in District 5 and District 4. So they're receiving a lion's share of the community enrichment funds as recommended by the staff. And then as you go more north and west, they receive a smaller share of that funding.
Well, I can tell you personally, I'm not going to test it.
Yes, sir.
My house was built in 1965, so I have no personal dog in this fight.
Yes, sir.
And I don't know who out there may have purchased a house from a developer that might come knocking on your door asking for their money back. And I think that the likelihood of that happening is pretty low.
Yes, sir.
But one of the key questions that I asked the city auditor was, whenever we went from a 1.5 mile radius to a 5 mile radius, there was a clean break, right?
Yeah, but I question that. I haven't never seen any documentation or anything that substantiates that, and I really don't have faith in previous leadership, previous parks leadership. If they created a mess that we have now, I really question if they really had, the wherewithal to have a deliberate cut between, the 1.5 and the 5 mile, and was able to really keep accounting practices to make sure that that was adhered to. I question that.
Well, but what's the benefit right now of, instead of having, okay, this gets approved by council at whatever meeting, assuming it passes planning commission, it goes to well, it's inevitably going to go to council. Let's say, what's stopping you, or what is your apprehension of having it be a clean break?
Because I really believe, I have a conviction that it's impossible to find a clean break. Once given, as the auditor stated, there's missing records. This fund has been in existence and expenditures over 14 years. As I stated before, there's been commingling of funds. I think I've stated on multiple occasions that it really would take a forensic accountant to determine where that break lies. So,
the break would lie all the funds that were collected up until this date, whenever it was approved by council, or if they decide, fiscal year 23 or whatever.
But
that would be the break. So
but the question is, at that break, which area or which development contributed where in between, up until that date, and how do we make sure that those funds are spent in that area of that within the 5 miles of that contributing development? That's what I'm saying is so convoluted.
Well, that's my whole point. Is I agree it's convoluted.
Yes, sir.
But somebody else in another council approved that system, right?
Yes, sir.
And we're being asked to approve another system, which I'm in 100% agreement with you, is
Yes,
a
sir.
better way to collect and dispense the money.
Yes, sir.
What I'm concerned is a decision that I make, or a decision that city council makes, that basically says, okay, any funds that were collected up until this point, it does not matter what the UDC said prior to this point.
Mm-hmm.
That money's going to be given 54% over here, and 15% over there, and 7% over there.
Mm-hmm.
It's not taking into consideration the intent of the original text.
Yes, sir. And my response to that is, we're not asking the planning commission to make a determination on how the previous funds are going to be spent. That is two totally separate issues. The issue is that we're bringing before the commission for you all to consider is, how do we improve the UDC in the system? As far as we have this bank of funds and how we're going to spend it, well, that's a council decision. That's a council policy decision, and we're going to take a recommended budget to them. If they like that recommendation, they approve it. If they don't and think that there should be a clean break, they'll make that decision there. But that's a decision that we have to have. I mean, that's a discussion that we have to have with the council. But before we have the discussion, we have to have a discussion with the planning commission just to get the recommendations and the system approved to make it a better system for the city.
Well, Nina and Buck, is it within our purview to, could I make a motion to approve the text amendments as presented with the caveat that they come into effect at the point it's either approved by council or the next fiscal year?
Yes, certainly the planning commission can make additional recommendations to staff's ordinance.
I wanted to ask on that point, if I may, to exactly what you're saying. So one of the recommendations from the audit committee was that a decision needs to be made on how to spend the existing funds, either per the old rules or the new rules. They didn't really make a recommendation on which camp they were in. do y'all have a recommendation from Parks Department?
Yes, sir. Our recommendation is in line with the budget that we are proposing to council, which is it'd be an equitable distribution of the funding.
Does that mean that it would, essentially, it's existing funds follow the new rules? Or am I misunderstanding that?
Well, the existing funds would be allocated in accordance with the growth and the size of the districts.
Okay.
Commissioner Schrader?
So, in your presentation, and I thought I printed that and brought it with me, but I didn't find in there that you were tying the percentage of distribution to what you're asking us to approve tonight. Is that language in?
No, sir. Again, because as far as on how the money is going to spend, is going to be a discussion with staff and the council on how they're going to appropriate the funding.
Okay, so
we have to make that recommendation, or a recommendation to council. I think that's why we're wondering.
we have to make a recommendation for what the rules are going forward.
Yes.
There is no place in there, and this is what I was talking about the last meeting, how the money that has been, that this audit is evaluating and has been previously collected, how that is redistributed, and this is not on the table for us tonight, correct?
Yes, sir. That's correct, sir.
So
That's correct, sir.
that's why I don't understand why we can't make a decision on to change these rules if we agree with them going forward from here on out, and money collected from here on out will be collected in accordance to those new rules. And then there is another decision, and whether that even comes to us or not, Assistant City Manager Young here is telling us that's going to be staff and council. It won't even be a planning commission decision, correct?
That's correct. Even once the new policy is adopted and monies come in under new policy, just like any other budget, it goes before council. Council considers, adopts, and appropriates. It doesn't come to the commission.
So that's, I mean, I understood this that they were disconnected, and I don't think that's been, I don't think that's been understood that
No,
way.
you're right. I did not understand that. Because if we're changing the rules, my understanding was they need some direction on, well, what do we do with the old money? Do we go, so if we're not making a recommendation to them, so the rules get changed, the ordinance that's before us just only covers the funds collected from that date on. If it's not coupled, then
The
then
draft
fine.
ordinance didn't include any language that was adopting how that was spent.
It's just like the development fees, how you all approve changes, or there's been approvals to the changes in development fees for DSD. Well, yeah, those fees are, captured in UDC and those are approved, but the actual fees that are collected and how they're going to be adopted and appropriated, that retains under the purview of council. So.
Yeah, because, I mean, Commissioner Miller was speaking towards the 1.5 mile versus 5 mile and how they're going to, if somebody really wants to get in to where all that money was or wasn't. Well, the other side of that is, and could be even bigger, is all of the line items that were combined at some point. Because, if we're looking at Ben Garzon has all that money, that was a bunch of line items that was consolidated for that. So then you try to, I don't want to have any part of trying to dig that apart if you're if somebody's trying to ferret out exactly where every single dollar was, and that's why I'm really concerned about getting all wound up in that, and it's not even, in our realm. What we're really trying to do is find a way forward with more transparency and better accountability from here forward. Any money that now is collected would be under this new set of rules once they're in place, but until they're in place, they don't collect it that way.
I get that, and I want to ask maybe for clarification, because I understand what Commissioner Schrader's saying, and how to address the existing funds isn't in this ordinance, but because it's brought up, it seems to make sense to make a recommendation to council on how to address existing funds while we're addressing this. But is that not part of our purview? Or is that a separate thing that's going to come up? Are we going to hear an audit when it's done, and then we address, how does that work?
if the planning commission wishes to make a recommendation on how those are spent, they can make that recommendation to council. It's still a council decision.
Right, but is that going to come, so like the audit committee saying they felt that was important, that a decision be made consciously, one way or the other, what to do with those funds, but is that going to come back by through our commission, or is it just?
It would come back by through this commission if it was a UDC change.
Okay, so we won't hear anything about the audit again or be dealing with that?
I mean, that may just be something that would be in a director's report that, hey, this item went to council and here's what they decided, just like we hear updates on the commission made a recommendation and, oh, by the way, council didn't agree, or basically.
Right.
Okay.
So not required, but I guess we could if we wanted, is what you're saying. Okay, thank you.
Personally, I want to thank city staff. I know we have beat this issue pretty hard, and there's been some changes, along the way. I certainly agree that the confines that you're able to operate in under the existing UDC are clunky and pretty onerous at best, and I certainly, agree with the simplification of this, and I think going forward, it makes things much easier to administer than it is right now. And so, I also want to thank y'all with going back and visiting with the development community, from the first draft, what the proposed fee was to now. I think, there was a lot of working with stakeholders and hearing different sides and coming to the table. So I know this process has been lengthy, probably a little painful, and I just want to say thanks for persevering and working with the planning commission to try and make the best decision for the citizens. And I think that's what staff wants. That's what everyone on this commission wants. And so appreciate y'all's work. It's been a process, but I think sometimes as much dialogue as we've had on this, sometimes it's healthy, and I think at the end of the day, we've come up with something that is better from where we were, better than when this process started, and so I think it's healthy as part of the process. So appreciate y'all.
Thank you, sir.
If there's no other questions for staff, I guess we need to, is there any public comment on item 18? Being none, I'll close the public comment period, and I'd like a recommendation.
I'll make a motion that we approve item, what is this, 18? Item 18, the Unified Development Code text amendment as presented.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion from Commissioner Schrader and a second from Commissioner York. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Opposed.
Motion passes. Moving on to item 19.
Yes, Chair, Nina Nixon Mendez, Assistant Director. The next item is an ordinance adopting text amendments to the Unified Development Code to adjust requirements for master preliminary plats and platting regulations regarding expirations and extensions. So we can go back to slide 1. Okay. We did present a briefing of these amendments earlier this year. I'm sure you will recall. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the amendments to be made to the section pertaining to master preliminary plats, and essentially what we are doing is proposing deleting the maximum acres that were in there. We actually have some applicants that have properties that exceed the maximum right now and would like to do a master preliminary plat, and so that's one of the driving forces behind this amendment. Next, please. Also, we are eliminating lot lines. We want to go to density as opposed to lot lines for master preliminary plats because these are more conceptual in nature. And next. Then the Second Amendment deals with plat expiration and time extension. And so for both of those, for plat expiration, we're going from 6 to 12 months, and then it's the same for time extensions. We've seen a need to do this. We have quite a number of plat extensions that y'all see every meeting, and we see developers having difficulty, particularly with supply chain right now. And so we believe that this will provide some relief related to that. And next, please. And staff recommends approval. I stand by for questions.
Commissioner York?
Just one quick one. There's one that I brought up last time, so one that's always been there as a potential issue that's not being addressed right here is the impervious cover. So you may not add units, but maybe you added a cul-de-sac, so you got a little bit more street. And sometimes those rules can be followed to a T. I just wanted to ask that there's that 10% rule where you can have a little leeway. Does that apply here?
There is a provision related to density, so it's, if it's an increase in density, it typically would require an amendment to a preliminary or a master preliminary as well. The 10%, I believe, actually pertains to more site development standards. So it could be lot lines, it could be setbacks.
Well, that's what this is. I'm not talking density. I'm talking the impervious cover. Sorry, and that's why I wondered. So what I don't want to see is somebody.
Okay.
You're making the process easier, which I love.
Right.
But say they just shifted some things around, but one thing they did technically added 50 square feet of pavement they didn't have before. Maybe they added a cul-de-sac where they didn't, or something like that. And you've added impervious cover. Now you have to resubmit. That's why I'm wondering.
No, that we would not require that.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Commissioner Schrader?
One question, effectively the shift from, or the fact that if a development's large enough, a developer really has to have, if they want to try to develop it all in one shot so that they don't have phases and then they don't have to submit the preliminary master plan, essentially that puts the onus on them to have all their ducks in a row and have everything worked out. And so it essentially takes care of itself. If you're capable, have the staff and the resources to develop all the detail in that initial shot, it does put some onus on the reviewing process that you've got to be prepared to review that whole thing at one time. But effectively, in most cases, that's going to take care of itself, is it not?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, thank you. Is there anybody wanting to make a public comment on item number 19? There being none, I'll close the public comment period, and we'll look for a motion on item number 19.
Move we approve item 19 as presented by staff.
I second.
We have a motion by Commissioner York, a second by Commissioner Zarguni. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, moving on to Section D, item 20, tabled zoning. Item number 20.
Elena Buendeo, Development Services. Thank you for your patience, Commissioners. I am not as smooth as Andrew Demas, who is called away on a family emergency, but let me know he's watching me. The zoning case before you was tabled from February 23rd. It's 022205, ERF Real Estate, Inc. It's a rezoning of a property at 4130 South Alameda Street. Currently, they're zoned RM1 and RM1 SP, and they are requesting to go to CN1. The proposed use is for a commercial use. You can see the surrounding uses include to the north, single family, to the south, vacant, single family, to the east, vacant, and to the west is a commercial shopping center. Public notification, 20 notices were mailed out. 2 were received in opposition, only totaling a little over 3%, 1 in favor. Staff analysis and recommendation. Back in 2018, this property was up for rezoning, and the community was not comfortable with the CN1 on the RM1, and so they went to the RM1 and the RN3 and allowed the CN1. That was sort of the compromise that was done at that time. That went into effect in 2019. Since then, nothing has happened to the property, and now the owners are requesting CN1. Staff has concerns, although the rezoning is not consistent with the comprehensive plan. It is in keeping with the character of the commercial node. However, a portion of the subject property is encroaching into the neighborhood. And the biggest concern is Everhart is not constructed to arterial standard and may have a negative traffic impact to the adjacent residents. The CN1 that's requested, you could have the drive-through restaurant. Staff stands by for any questions.
Any questions for staff on item 20? Commissioner Miller?
I did some homework on this, and prior to me being on the planning commission, the original requested zoning for the entire tract was CN1, and that passed through planning commission. And at the time that had gone through planning commission, the city staff had recommended approval at that time.
Approval of the CN1
Correct.
on that corner, sort of with the agreement between the applicant, staff, and the community, that little buffer area was RM1 with an SP. That SP specifically asked that there be no drive-through.
No, if you go back to the 2018 original presentation, right, it was for the whole triangle. And at that time, staff was recommending approval of the CN1 for the entire tract of land. Planning Commission agreed with staff. It went to City Council. City Council tabled it, and then City Council went back and made some agreements with the property owner, or I think it was still the previous property owner. I think it was still owned by the Nuns at the time. And they put together this, kind of hybrid situation where you've got some RM1, some RM3, you got CN1, and then the remaining triangle was to remain RS6. So I was just kind of curious what has changed from 2018 to 2022 with staff's, the way they see this property,
I can address that, Commissioner.
Okay.
I think one of our primary concerns is, and that maybe we had not realized this originally with our first recommendation, is the depth of the proposed commercial into the property. And with a CN1, there could be increased traffic on Everhart. That's the primary concern. That was brought out in the public hearing, and we didn't realize the current problems that had been occurring along Everhart with respect to the cut-through traffic through the neighborhood. And so that has influenced staff in their recommendation. Secondly, again, there was concern brought out related to the impacts of a drive-through establishment, and that's one of the things that was prohibited with the council approval.
So on the RM1 with a special permit What was that, what were the terms of that special permit?
The terms included essentially eliminating some uses, and those uses were pertaining to, they wanted to accept blood plasma donation center, minor emergency center, and hospital. And they
They
wanted
wanted to exclude that or include that?
accept it,
Okay.
exclude it. And they also wanted to eliminate, allow restaurants except drive-through facilities as an accessory use. And then they also wanted to accept out convenience goods, so they didn't want to see a convenience store at that RM1 location.
Okay.
So the concept was to allow the CN1 for the bulk of the property, and then if you notice where the CN1 boundary is, that's about 330 feet from the street, and you can see it aligns with the commercial frontage adjacent to it. And so the concept was to keep that area CN1 and then allow some commercial uses in the RM1 with those exceptions, and then provide the RM1 to the back. That would give them a little bit more flexibility with respect to the type of residential development that could potentially go in.
And another thing that I noticed in my self-taught history lesson was in 2018, this was quite a excitable zoning case. And there was a lot of people, and I'm really surprised not to see all the pitchforks and torches out there. Could you read the opposition and in favor letters?
The two that are in opposition have no reason.
And in favor?
No reason.
I was just check the box.
Correct, although I believe every owner. No, they just checked the box.
We did have some testimony at the last meeting.
Yes.
Opposed.
Okay,
Most of those folks that were here for this zoning case, but it got tabled.
right.
Commissioner
And
Schroeder? Oh,
was-
sorry.
Was there proper notification to everybody that was here last time that, I mean, I guess they saw it, that it was being tabled. But whenever this, we have a notification time period and everything else, that doesn't, there's not a re-notification because it got moved to a later date, correct?
No.
All right. That's all I had.
Commissioner Schroeder?
I'm going to provide a little more context to that, what was on the table at that time. So to me, the major difference at that time was that the building that was previously on there was still in existence. The owner, the order was attempting to sell it, and through their real estate agent, they were essentially, because it was an existing non-conforming, it was there prior to zoning existing, and they were essentially asking it being, the zoning to be converted to what the building fit, the zone that the building fit. And so CN1 is what, because they thought it had a chance of selling for a use similar to what it was. And so but they were afraid that buyers were scared off by the fact that it was existing non-conforming, which in change of ownership, that would have required a zoning. So that's what they petitioned for. My understanding of what had the residents very upset, because I live in an adjacent neighborhood and heard a great deal of this, was that there was a rumor spread that somebody was trying to buy this and use it for migrant children housing, which the border issue was very hot at the time, and that spread like wildfire, and people were scared to death that that was what that building was going to be used for. In my opinion, this is a completely different issue now because it's now a greenfield site. It's now that there is no structure on it. It's, what is the worst-case scenario for CN1, and does it fit? We have to look at it, regardless of what somebody may or may not be planning, because it's we have to look at it for what we think may be the worst or the most non-compatible use of CN1, because that could be what it's developed into. So that's what I recall from that case.
All right, any other comments, questions for staff? Okay. Is the applicant or the applicant's representative, if you would please come on up?
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is James Poole. I'm a representative of Vaquero Ventures. We're located at 2900 Wingate Street, Fort Worth, 76107. I want to start off by thank you for tabling it last meeting because I wasn't able to get here due to the weather. We're coming to you with proposed rezone for approximately 2-acre tract, the northeast corner of Alameda and Everhart. Currently RM1, we're proposing CN1 to match the remainder of the property and those uses there at that intersection. And knowing that this has a history being contested, prior rezone in 2018, we tried to reach out to some of the neighboring residents through phone calls. Staff also sends out a notice, but we also mailed out notices as well, tried to receive feedback and, provide insight to what we're planning and answer any questions they may have had. And so, for the most part, what we've received and gained from prior meetings is the screening, landscaping, lighting, noise, and access are the major hot button items. So this site, as it sits now, we already have the benefit of a 75-foot buffer, if you can see that on your screen up there, between our north boundary and Carmel Parkway with the drainage ditch. In addition to that, there's another 40 feet of right-of-way there that separates our property boundary from the nearest resident on the north end. So it's a total of 115 feet separation there. Similarly, on the south end at Everhart, there's 85 feet of right-of-way between our property and the nearest resident. And in addition, there's a 25-foot building setback along that property boundary. So there's another 110 feet of separation there from us and the nearest resident. And when you look at this intersection, all three of these other projects there, every one of them directly abuts an existing resident. Our project would not be doing that. And so as far as like right now, what we have planned on the north end of this on Alameda frontage is a Starbucks. On that 1-acre portion, the remaining 1-acre portion in the back, we don't have a specific plan at the moment. And understand Commission's concerns about having a wide open zoning. You can have whatever you want come in, definitely get that. The main goal for us is just to have a cohesive development with everything zoned the same so we can have cross access and all those things in there. I think from a screening standpoint, to help address that on that north property boundary, we're more than willing to install solid screening there. We can add landscaping on the outside of that screening to soften it up for those residents' view. Lighting here is all going to be all full cutoff. Like, our clients are going to require that. Code's going to require that. That shouldn't be an issue. From a noise standpoint, we picked the Starbucks to go in this location closest to the residents because it has the least amount of impact, if any at all, from a noise standpoint. And then from an access standpoint, Alameda is the heavily trafficked thoroughfare. That's what drove us to this location. That's what drew everybody else to these other locations. And so we have 2 proposed access points off Alameda. That's where we envision most of our traffic coming from. And then the Everhart would just be so people could exit at a light. And I appreciate y'all's time and consideration, and I'm available for any questions you may have.
Commissioner Miller?
Thank you. So I assume since you're not the applicant, you got this property under contract?
Yes, sir.
And do you have the entire piece of property under contract, or just the CN1 and the RM1 and the RM2 or 3? Or is it the whole
Correct.
thing?
No, we don't have that triangle piece in the back under contract.
But
So
every-
4.6 or 4.8 acres.
So the whole trapezoid, you're not just buying the L, right?
Correct.
And so you're wanting to make the CN1, the other two parcels consistent with the other CN1.
Yes, sir.
And you say you're going to put a Starbucks, and anytime anybody tells me they're going to put anything, I have to like put on blinders and cover my ears, because I have to make a determination based on anything that you could put there, right?
Right.
We see a lot of watercolor engineers, and oh yeah, we're going to put a Chick-fil-A, or we're going to put a Starbucks, or something that gets people excited, and it has a tendency to influence certain people. But I always eyes and ears covered up. Does this make sense, right? And parts of it do make sense, but I do know that a council before us had some pretty specific, apprehension against a drive-through facility of any sort. Nina, can you provide any insight into that? I didn't view the whole council meeting to see what their concerns were, and I assume that their concerns and staff's concerns has to do with traffic.
I think it was traffic and then noise. If you have, the ordering, that often can be loud through the drive-through, and so I think those were the two primary concerns.
What I look at the Starbucks at Staples and in the Staples and Doddridge area, right? And the stacking that occurs at that particular Starbucks can get kind of crazy. You got a fire department right there and a CVS, and I think that was kind of a poorly selected location, in my opinion. Is there any tools that we have as a planning commission to, figure out, put some sort of limitations on it to where I have a comfortable feeling about how they're going to stack traffic within the site? Because my concern is if this gets approved, and let's say you make a pad site right out there on Alameda and, do a land lease to Starbucks or Chick-fil-A or whoever, and then all of a sudden, because that is a busy intersection, which is the reason why you want it, right? But especially in the mornings and the afternoons, there's a lot of traffic that gets kind of stacked up there. And what I don't particularly want to see from a traffic standpoint is traffic going down Everhart, looping back in, stacking that way and congesting the other side of that intersection.
Again, that could be governed through a special permit and submission of a site plan to show, but that would show the internal stacking through the drive-through.
Okay. I don't know how to say something like that, so when we get to that point, I might need some help.
Are there any other questions for the applicant? Thank you.
Thank you.
I guess I'll open item number 20 up for anyone wishing to make public comment on item number 20. You would please state your name and address for the record, please.
Jerry Susser, 225 Wilshire Place, Corpus Christi, Texas. And I think just to comment on your observation, this is a much larger piece of property that we have to control. and we'll be able to control that stacking because of the depth of it, and you know, there'll be a multiple tenant operation with cross-access in it. So I don't think that would be a real issue for us. It's obviously a great commercial area, and I think it serves the neighborhood very, very well. And we really do appreciate y'all's attention and time and your service. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Susser. Any other public comment on item number 20? There being none, I'll close the public hearing and ask for a motion.
I have a question for staff real quick before we, sorry.
Okay, Commissioner Schroeder.
On the, need a little clarification on what applies as far as the typical buffer on, since we have the drainage ditch there, does the buffer requirements of CN1 to RS 6 apply, or does the drainage ditch make that null?
I think the right of.
Yeah, we do have a right-of-way there, so therefore there would not be a buffer requirement.
Okay, so the street effectively
street, that
makes
is
it
correct.
not, then essentially that's an open boundary. Is that correct on that? And the same thing, as far as that goes, the same thing then would apply, obviously, on the Everhart side. Is that effectively, if we're approving that additional depth back into that side of the neighborhood, that's effectively an open boundary too, due to the road?
That is correct. The only buffer that would apply would be to the triangle, to the
undeveloped piece of property.
undeveloped, yes, sir.
Is that triangle RS6?
Yes.
Okay.
But it's not developed, so if it's developed first, they don't have to put the buffer. Okay, thank you.
I wanted to ask before we make any motions, Commissioner Miller, can you explain what your concerns were? What you were trying to figure out a way to word?
Well, my concerns were from a traffic standpoint, and I understand that you know, zoning changes based on real estate deals, right? And I guess at some point, wasn't the Ronald McDonald House or something going to go on this L-shaped property? That's why they were looking for a RM1.
That was one of
think
the
that was
considerations. Yeah,
Right.
that's one of the considerations, yeah.
And so things change, and obviously you want to make something marketable that, you know, or market it to a market that exists. My concerns were a little bit with traffic because it sounded like a council previously had some concerns about traffic because of the limitations of not putting a drive-through type facility, a restaurant or coffee shop or whatever at that location. But after further consideration in my thought processes, I've got enough. I'll let this council make those determinations.
I'm prepared to offer an alternative proposal in a motion that addresses those. If there aren't any more questions.
No question, but just one comment. I know CN1, I struggled. I know there's going to be some difference in traffic, but I don't know that it necessarily would be that much worse because right now it's RM1. RM1's going to have potentially, granted at peak hours, they've told us they have plans to put in a Starbucks, but like Commissioner Miller was saying, we're supposed to have blinders. This is CN1. If that all turned into, different, some type of offices or something, it could be less than RM1. So it's just a comment, something that I'm struggling a little bit with because it could be worse, but it could not be worse.
Commissioner Salazar Garza?
Yeah, I would just want to ask a couple of questions. I can't remember, I know I've driven there so many times, especially go to Town and Country. the Everhart, that little street, Everhart, does it have a middle lane, turning lane?
No.
It doesn't, it's just a two-way to get to the dead end, right? I was just thinking, because I remember on the other side, which is Robert Drive, I believe? Is it Robert?
Yes.
That was something that was, if I remember right, it was just a two-lane, and I would have never thought they would have put an H-E-B, and I think Cancun Restaurant is right across, which does have the drive-through right in front of Robert, if I'm not mistaken. I just thought about that when I saw this, and so I thought, I wonder if that's the case, because I think now, Robert Drive, I think it does have, I'm not sure if it has a turning lane to get to, like when you're coming on Alameda and then you take a left,
Onto
There's no
Roberts.
turning
there's
lane.
no turning lane,
no
right?
turning lane, it's
It's
only-
just a two-lane.
But Cancun is like kind of a non-conforming installation there too, I'm pretty sure. Because they're kind of routing traffic around the dumpster and, you know, but sometimes somebody does get, you know, caught in that giant chug hole of a pothole right there and
Well,
trying to
And for
get in
that
for the
matter,
tacos.
I think on Alameda, right across the Town and Country, if they have that barn drive-through pickup, whatever, and that it's just a little. It's an area that has a lot of commercial businesses, and the streets are older streets. It's an older neighborhood, but every time I've driven through there, I mean, the traffic does it's a bit heavy, but it's not anything that. It's no worse than Staples and, you know, Everhart and down Saratoga. I think that's a little worse, but I don't know. I just wanted to ask that because I don't remember. I don't go there often. But when I do, I know, I couldn't remember if they had the turning lane or not, so, find out, thank you.
Real quick before we move forward, and sorry to put you on the spot, you've done a great job filling Andrew's shoes. Can you briefly go through what is allowed in CN1?
Oh, sure. You could have office use, restaurant uses, restaurant with a drive-through, medical.
And I believe restaurants, there's a square foot a maximum
Yes,
of 5,000.
5,000 square feet.
Okay,
Those are typical uses.
thank you.
Can we get a motion for item 20?
Okay, I'm going to make a motion on this, and this is in consideration of two things. One is or three things actually. One is that since the prior zoning on this is relatively recent, and there were reasons and concerns for that, recognizing the applicant's desire to have a contiguous zoning, but also in light of that this is deeper than adjacent commercial properties, I'm going to make a motion, and this also takes into account that the applicant has indicated that they are willing to look at buffering elements to include those. So I'm going to make a motion that we approve the CN1 with a special permit qualification that the buffer requirements between CN1 and RS6 are applied to this, although without removing those requirements because of the right-of-ways. I don't know if I've stated that clearly enough. But.
If I hear you correctly, I think we would have to approve a special permit allowing CN1 uses with the caveat of the buffer that you mentioned.
Yes. Can that be called a CN1 with special requirements or no?
No, the CN1 once granted CN1, he's allowed everything. But if you want to,
Well, I'm not looking to limit the use. I mean, the what can be placed on it. I was looking to being able to apply the buffer requirements. So that needs to be a lesser zoning to do that?
Yes, it has to be a lesser base zoning with all CN1 uses allowed with the buffer
Okay, so
requirement.
we're kind of back to where with that kind of motion, we're back to where it's, you don't have a contiguous use. So you can't put special buffer requirements on a,
You can't I guess, you can't impose special requirements on a zoning that are above and beyond what's already there, if that makes sense. Once you make it CN1, the CN1 rules apply across the board.
so how do we put, when we have these zonings with the special permit and then we list, like for instance, buffers are required and lighting controls are required, and that those are added to a zoning that doesn't have them? Is that what you're saying? In
Right,
other words-
we don't upzone them, we keep them at their current zoning, then add a special permit to allow those additional uses with a special permit, and then add the buffering requirements, or whatever other requirements that we add. So you can accomplish, what you're trying to accomplish is allowing the CN1 use, which you can do with the special permit, but you're still gonna have to utilize the special permit.
Okay, so what is the base zoning I have to take it to?
You can leave this base zoning, what's it?
RM.
You can leave this base
Okay, I
zoning the
guess
same.
I'm just going to withdraw the motion because I don't quite understand how that. I'll allow somebody else.
I'll make a motion that we approve as presented.
I'll second that.
Well, actually, what's presented is to deny.
Is denial.
Sorry.
Oh! Okay. I'll withdraw mine and I'll let somebody else do it.
I'll tell you what,
I'll withdraw that second because I was on board with what you meant. Okay, let me try this.
I nominate Michael York to make the motion.
I make a motion that we approve the rezoning from RM1 to C, or recommend approval of rezoning from RM1 to CN1.
and just to clarify, that's contrary to staff's recommendation, correct?
Correct.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Opposed.
Motion carries.
Elena Buendeo, Development Services. In front of you is zoning case 032202, Elizabeth and Eldemiro Garza. They are requesting a rezoning at 11110 IH 37, AKA Upriver Road, from the RS6 single-family residential to CN1. Again, the current zoning is single-family residential. The proposed use would be to keep the single-family residential, but to allow for a mobile vending unit. As you can see, the adjacent land uses, low-density residential to the north, interstate to the south, and to the east and west, low-density residential. 30 notices were mailed out inside the 200-foot buffer, 0 opposed, 1 in favor. Although the proposed zoning is not consistent with the future land use map, it's generally consistent with many other elements, broader elements of the comprehensive plan. The future land use map for the subject property doesn't take into consideration that the subject property is the only property that fronts IH 37. As a result of, from what staff could determine, takings for IH 37, the property became existing non-conforming. So the properties that exist to the east are vacant, have no structures, and the property directly adjacent to the north is also vacant with no structure. Staff's recommendation is denial of the CN1 in lieu of a special permit, allowing the applicant to retain the base zoning and allow for an accessory use of a food truck. These are the conditions of the special permit. No other uses other than that are allowed in the base zoning district other than the restaurant use for the outdoor mobile vending unit. There are specific hours of operation, specific location of where the mobile vending unit can be. They can tie into the utilities on site. There are specific parking requirements, and there is a time limit. And this time limit is that they need to get their mobile vending permit within 12 months. Staff stands by for any questions.
Yeah, just one, anytime they do a special permit in lieu of, I just want to ask, was the applicant coordinated with on this, and are they open to this?
Yes.
Okay.
The parking requirement on this, is that particular to the special permit, or is that pulled from something else, some other area that allows mobile vending units? Or I guess the reason I'm asking this is there a concern at all, because this is just right near there, I think, is an off-ramp. Is there a concern of a stacking concern or a?
Yes, there's a concern of stacking on TxDOT right away.
So since this is likely going to be a essentially permanent installation, I mean, in other words, they're not, this is not like a park it in the evening after work and then take it somewhere else. They're intending to operate from here.
Correct, and that's
the way
part of
I
the.
read that, yeah.
Yes, that's part of the permit.
So is the 4 parking spaces, is that kind of consistent with what we require for other?
For similar mobile vending unit
Yes.
use.
In this particular case, we took into consideration the fact that it's going to be retained as, the house is going to be retained as a residential use with the mobile permit, and we determined that 4 spaces would be sufficient for that, given the sequencing of their typical customers.
Okay.
Commissioner Salazar Garza?
This is the area where you exit off of Violet, where you get to that, okay?
Correct.
That area gets extreme, right, when everybody's getting off, and that they want to put
It is existing.
and their home on the land?
We have .1736 acres. It's relatively small.
It's on the corner?
It is not exactly on the corner. If you can sort of see from in there.
Exit off and then get, yeah, there's not even.
This right here that you see onto 37, that is the entrance. That is the entrance ramp.
That's a really bad area. It just gets really bad.
Is that an entrance ramp or an exit ramp?
Entrance. It's an entrance ramp.
Where's the exit ramp? Could you pull up the map in a bigger format? Google Earth or something?
Oh, yeah, I did do that. I don't know if we can see that. Where?
Is the subject property before the closest exit ramp or after?
After. After the entrance ramp.
So there's no conceivable possibility for a situation where you're going to have high-speed traffic exiting IH-37?
No.
And potentially log jamming right there
No.
because somebody's trying to get in and grab a taco?
No.
Okay. That kind of answer your question, Cynthia?
Well, no, not really, because, I mean, I guess I may be seeing this wrong. because I drive down there all the time, and I know when I'm getting off of that exit, I don't even remember what it is. I think it's the Van Morgan, or the exit prior to Violet would be.
I should know this since
It should be
I went on a
McKenzie.
property
It
and
should be McKenzie, isn't
missed
it?
it twice, I believe so, yes. It's stacked quite a bit away. So what you were looking at here, that is the entrance onto 37. The property is just north of that. It's further north. It's further north. It is difficult to tell from the mapping.
So the exit on Violet is gonna be kind of where that convenience store is, and then there's a chicken shack and the credit. This would be back several hundred feet behind the exit, so it's not, it's past the entrance ramp, but, so it's kind of a no man's land, I guess.
Correct.
So all the traffic coming onto the freeway would enter the freeway before it hits this property, and all the traffic exiting would be long after this property.
Yeah, I thought it was right there before you get to Circle K that has the subway, which that's not your picture, what this is.
I have a question. Is this
Yes.
a case, I don't know if we can ask this, but is this a case where this was an existing use that wasn't permitted and now they're having to permit? In other words, was this taco truck already, has it been running for the last 6 months or year or whatever?
It has been running since COVID, is my understanding, and
So a
talking to
year
the
or so?
applicant.
Has there ever been any
Yes.
complaints about traffic stacked up on the access road since they've been operating that we know of?
Not that we know of.
Thank you.
And no other code violations. The applicant had a store, a restaurant, and it had to close because of COVID. So this was the alternative, and they have found it to be successful, and they are attempting to bring it into compliance.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, there being none, I'll open this item up for public comment. Anybody wishing to comment on item 21? There being none, I'll close the public comment and look for a recommendation.
I'll make a motion that we approve as recommended by staff.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Do we have a director's report tonight?
Yes, I believe all of you received the flyer for the next series of the Small Scale Development Virtual Workshop. And again, this is being coordinated by our planning department. It's on a Zoom platform. There is a fee for registration, and the URL is www.creatingcc.com/incdev. Thank you.
I do have one question for you, Nina. I
Yes, sir.
know we moved the meeting time from 5:30 to 6:30 because of the COVID updates. Are those still happening, or when can we
Yeah.
move back to our 5:30 meeting
Our
time?
next meeting will be moving back to 5:30.
Wonderful, thank you.
Actually, I have two questions. One, to that, and I was thinking of this earlier. Everybody that got notified, I guess, a week ago or 2 weeks ago, did they get proper notice that it's 5:30 now, not 6:30?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
And
Good point, Commissioner.
the other one is
And the
more,
time's gonna change on Sunday too.
Thank you, Commissioner.
I
I'll
guess
note
sort of,
that.
Make sure you update all the clocks.
sort of related to the future agenda items, but really just a question for staff. Something came up recently, made me think of this, but I know staff has commissioned a consultant to look at the master plans, utility master plans for the city. And I wonder, what is the progress of that? And then the second part of that question is, this task, does it involve actually drafting new master plans, or are they just evaluating the state of the current master plans?
The task is to have new master plans.
Okay.
And, the current status is that that's in progress right now. I can't tell you what percent, but.
But there's no, we don't have a delivery date. I didn't recall if one was set when
Yeah.
they came on.
Yeah, I don't know, but I can get back with y'all on that.
Okay, yeah, I'm just
Yeah.
curious. Thank you.
All right, let's adjourn.